Welcome everyone to the Genetic Alliance webinar series on registries and biobanks. We're delighted to welcome you. This is Sharon Terry. I'm President and CEO of Genetic Alliance, and really excited to be able to share with you both about registries and biobanks in general, but specifically today about Registries for All. All of you are muted, and that's because there are many of you. We are welcoming your questions, however, and Greg Biggers from Genetic Alliance Council and also our entrepreneur in residence will be curating your questions throughout the presentation. So you should feel free to ask your questions whenever you feel the need to, and he'll be putting those together so that we can answer them at the end of the presentation, which should take about 20 minutes. I apologize for any distortion in sound. I'm in California in a not ideal situation in a kind of echoey room, but we'll do the best we can. If you do have any technical problems, like I'm impossible to hear or something like that, you can also type that in, and Tanya Mirza, who takes care of our technology issues, will try to alert me to those issues. Tanya, you can probably do that via text so we don't disturb everyone else. So I'm just going to get rolling, and so Tanya, if you could give me control of the screen, that would be terrific. Okay, so today we're going to present Registries for All, which is a tool platform that we're excited about. This has been developed by an enormous team at Genetic Alliance, at Private Access, at TraitWise, and then through a whole host of other contributions from CFIDS Association, Inflammatory Breast Cancer, National Psoriasis, and lots of others who have commented as we've gone. As with all things that Genetic Alliance does, this is a community effort. We are no pride of ownership in the sense that we want to absolutely have it be owned by the community and for all of you to improve it in whatever ways you see it can be improved. So we all know that the problem for all of us in some way, and by all of us today I'm going to really mean the public, because while many of us on this webinar might be here because of a specific disease or a specific interest in studying a disease, we know that everyone has to be able to participate in biomedical research together, or we're not going to get to the place we want to be in terms of therapies, treatments, diagnostics, interventions, etc. And right now there seems to be a lot of discourse about, is it safe to keep information on the internet? How are we going to make sure that it's protected? How are we going to make sure that we can share it freely? And those are the kinds of things that Genetic Alliance began to look at. Today I will not be talking about the Genetic Alliance Registry and Biobank, which is something that we've run since 2003. That's the only way run cross-disease registry and biobank for rare diseases and genetic diseases overall. But this project here will dovetail with that one eventually. This one is agnostic to disease, and this one is cross-disease. So this one is quite unique to begin to look at pathways and other things that we think are going to be very important, comorbidities, et cetera, as we move into biomedical research. It's often been said about genetic diseases, especially about rare diseases, and even about common diseases as we start to stratify them, that finding the people to be in these studies is like finding needles in haystacks. And we basically don't agree. We believe that that myth is built. And the reason that we say that is that essentially every one of us, if you go through your day today and look at every person, each person obviously is carrying a genotype and a phenotype. And were all that data available to the brilliant researchers we have on this planet right now, we would be much farther along in terms of understanding both health and disease, prevention, interventions, et cetera. So our desire is to have that haystack made of needles be available. We've seen a huge culture shift over the years, and it's certainly one that has been very apparent to us in a whole host of other industries other than biomedical research and health services in general. In the industrial age that came before many of us, and some of the older ones of us felt a bit of control was important. There was scarce resources, whether those were tin or steel or paper. Hierarchies were in command. Things were linear. You had to do one thing after another. It was a win-win system. Now we're in an information age. We have more information than we know what to do with, but it's very organic, it's very networked, it's not linear, but everyone can win because we have an abundance of information. And we've seen this in every industry, whether it's music or publishing, all kinds of things. We have not seen it affect health the way that we wish it could. So we know we have the tools to address the problems of fragmented systems. If right now somebody walks by your office or your kitchen table and says, you know, I heard XYZ, you can say, I saw this show last night and it was really great, you can watch it right now. We can connect to the system that we can log into our healthcare system, like our pharmacy or maybe even our electronic medical records. But these things are very fragmented. They are not together well. And we know that data can accelerate both research and services and even get us to better patient outcomes. Again, a lot of biomedical research, because it's so expensive, so fragmented, so difficult, is focused on very basic problems, ones that have to do with the hardcore medical issues, and not so much on some of the quality of life issues, some of the issues in terms of how do individuals who live with disease or live with trying to prevent disease, how do they, in fact, how do they look at the world around them, and what can we learn from them? And even we have here, and save money. Of course, there's a lot of focus, especially in the U.S. these days, on better patient outcomes, comparative effectiveness research. And while officially none of that has to do with saving money, we also know that the IOM study and others around bending the cost curve are really important, particularly as our baby boomers age. So how do we get individuals onto the information highway? And certainly there's a lot of ways to do that, but today I'm going to talk about registries for all. And you can see in the lower right-hand corner of this slide, Reg4ALL.org is the URL for this system. It's live. You can play with it. You can experiment with it. You can enroll your loved ones in it. You can share it with others, etc. Essentially, it is built on a platform called Disease Info Search, which I'll show you in a second, and it's one that some of you are familiar with because it's a very old, in a good way, platform of Genetic Alliance that's just been versioned again. We believe that individuals need to be engaged. So it is not possible for people to just walk into systems whereby they understand how their information can add pieces to the puzzle. And so they need engagement, they need education. And I don't mean education in the traditional sense of let's teach them something. I'm always struck by things like statistics. Farmville on Facebook, more than 100 million people play Farmville, and they're all ages. And no one's ever sat down and said, how do we educate people as to the importance of playing Farmville? And the reason for that is because Farmville is interesting, it's fun, it has some needs. And the case I like to cite is my nephew gave me a cow a couple of years ago on Farmville. He's 10 years old and lives in Connecticut. I don't see him often. And so for me, keeping my farm with him, coming home from work and having a day gives him a way to relate to me and me to him. So not an intentional design element in Farmville, but one that engages both of us and one that keeps us engaged. We need to do the same thing, and we need to educate subtly in health in the same way. We come to part of the highway. We want to get on this highway, but we need to trust, can we get on this highway? Do I have everything I need to pull on to this highway? And so we're going to talk today about private access, which is a system whereby we're able to ensure trust, we're able to ensure that you actually are in control of where you're going to go on this highway, how you're going to drive, what lanes you'll go into, et cetera. In the first lane, we'll look at a gamified survey. In the second lane, we're going to look at some common data elements. And in the third lane, we'll look at some disease-specific data elements. So Disease Info Search that I mentioned is the platform that this Registries for All is based upon. Registries for All stands alone. Reg4ALL is its own URL, as I said, and you can just go directly to it. But you can also come to it from Disease Info Search, and this will be our way of inviting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals to this platform. Disease Info Search is 13 health disease pages. There are hundreds of thousands of visitors. It has very high SEO because it has a lot of integration with a lot of other systems that are quality information systems about each one of these diseases. Right now, biotech and pharma companies are coming to us to analyze data to choose which diseases might make sense for them to work on. simply because we have a great deal of information about each of those diseases that is both crowdsourced and curated and filtered from public databases, and filtered in such a way that the general public can boy, I'm losing the word, can actually absorb the information in a way that makes sense to them and not just in a way that the presenters have given to them. So for example, here we're looking at liver cancer. Description comes from OMIM. In some cases, the description from the disease has been edited by the disease advocacy organizations because they have a better one than OMIM, and that's fine. Sometimes it comes from the Genetics and Information Center that the Office of Rare Disease Research works on. And then there's a bunch of topics people can jump to. These are often either crowdsourced from the disease groups and then curated by our team of information specialists, or are filtered from PubMed, from genetic testing registry, from OMIM, et cetera. And again, we put filters in place so that the public isn't drowning in a fire hose of information, but instead is given the most relevant research on liver cancer and not the most esoteric brand new publication that came out today. So what individuals can do once they've visited this page is, in fact, be given this opportunity that now you see in the lower right-hand corner of your screen that says, how do you compare with others? And you can then say, hey, this is interesting, and I'd like to compare myself to others. The idea, again, that we're not going to take this in a hardcore kind of clinical way of saying, you can contribute to research, because that will not be appealing to the masses. But instead to say, I'm interested in how I compare to others, and so I want to register in this program. So our highway then is a cohesive way of bringing people into a system, into a project, into a platform that will, in fact, start to assemble the information that the individual needs and wants, and also that the system needs and wants, in order that clinical trials might find that participant, that researchers might find that the haystack is in fact made of needles. And so now I've moved to the place on the highway where we get to that red, yellow, and green red light post that says it's time for me to think about how do I want to set up my privacy settings. And there's three different things that I'm going to think about when I do that, and those are who can discover my data, who can contact me, and who can use my data. And we're putting, this is probably the most novel thing about this system, we are putting all of this sharing, privacy, and data access control and not in or in some gatekeeper's hands. And in this particular one we're looking at here, we're seeing a picture of Donna Cryer, who was the CEO of the American Liver Foundation, is well known, many, many years, almost 20 years in the liver field. She herself is a transplant recipient. And she has a little video there to give you some ideas about her concerns and her perspective around sharing data and access to data. So you have a guide that's going to give you a description of what she thinks might be low privacy concerns, moderate privacy concerns, and greater privacy concerns, and how she would set those settings. Depending on the disease, you're going to get a different guide. If diseases don't have a specific guide yet, then you get a generic guide. But in all cases, you'll have a guide or two or three to choose from that will help you. Because again, we're believing that while many of us are very savvy about this stuff, we really want to reach the average person, and we want to make sure they understand what it is they're looking at. So here's the full screen, and now we're looking at a matrix, essentially, that allows me to do this green, yellow, or red. And essentially three categories here, advocacy and support groups. So I could allow them to discover my data, contact me, or use my data. And the differences between those, and again, all of these are described in pop-ups and bubbles and all sorts of things, including the guide. But discover my data is essentially de-identified data. Can I give individuals access to my data with no identifiers on it so they can see that information, but they won't have any information about me? Can you contact me? So I might allow, for example, in this example here, I'm saying disease info search listed organizations serving my condition. I'm allowing them to discover my data. I'm allowing them to contact me. I'm not allowing them to use my data in this instance. Again, this is just an example. I'm saying, ask me. I want to know what you're doing. I want to hear what it is, and then I'll give you a yes or a no. And all of this is automated through an electronic system, so it isn't onerous for anyone. In the next instance, nonprofit organizations serving my condition in the general sphere, again, I'm saying allow discovering my data, ask me if you want to contact me, ask me if you want to use my data. And in the instance where you're asking me to contact me, you're using a pseudo-anonymization key so that you don't know who I am and you can't see my email address. In the next category, we're looking at medical researchers. And then the final category, we're looking at data analysis systems, and we list them there. And again, we is giving people the option of controlling their information on a granular level. Eventually, and this is a beta release, later this year we'll be able to actually move to granular control of various aspects of your information. So for example, I might be fine with everyone seeing my orthopedic data, but not my psychiatric data. And so I'll be able to granularly assign sharing and data access preferences for that information. So now let's look at the gamified survey. So I've passed through setting all my preferences. By the way, I can change these preferences because I will want to. We don't believe that, for example, signing a single blanket consent that should cover you for the rest of your life makes any sense. My context, my life, of course, my situation will change, and I will change my ideas about sharing. Michael J. Fox, before he decided to tell everyone that Parkinson's disease was very private, and now he's very public. We all are going to find ways in which we want to change over time, either become more private or less private, more sharing or less sharing, and the system allows that. So in the gamified survey, we essentially engage people with an interactive survey that we've actually found experiencing. This is brought to us by a company called Reg4ALL that has been engaging people through gamified surveys, using them in health, using them in corporations, using them in quite a number of ways that interact, that allow people to interact with data and see how they compare with others. And so one of the options that I have chosen that I do is be able to compare with others. And I'm going to show you a little video of this. And the reason I'm going to a video is because I wasn't sure about my connection today, where I am. So you're seeing something right now that is live, that if you go to Reg4ALL and start to play with it, you can look at this. And basically, I'm making choices here. You know, this one's my health affects the quality of my sleep, and I see that I stay slightly, and so do most people. I deal with stress, you know, medium well, and so do most people, and so on. So I'm essentially getting immediate feedback about my answer. And you've also noticed that actually playing with the system, actually over 8,000 questions I want. Here, a few moments after about 10 questions, it's first going to ask me whether or not I'm comfortable with de-identified information being used for medical research to help discover treatments, and I say yes. That starts to help the system actually set up how it's going to address me. So now it's asking me if I'd like to create a free Reg4ALL account. And at this point, I'm saying a company called Private Access, which works a lot like PayPal. We're all pretty comfortable with, once we've been validated by PayPal, using it to buy the things we want to buy online. And so this essentially allows me to set up my privacy account, to have my privacy preferences essentially follow me about my information here. And now I'm in, I've signed in. I'm now that I have migraines, and I get the kind of typical pop-up list. We have the 13,000 conditions in here, so any one of those and others, because you can add your own, can you put in. Actually now moving into the common data elements. So for example, assistive devices is considered part of what we should ask everyone for all diseases. Same thing with weight, height, and then some other associated questions that would be important for the condition. We also list all the medications that are available, et cetera. And so this experience has proven to be really appealing. We're looking at averages somewhere around 6 or 7 minutes a person on this website, which is quite astounding. It's way beyond what people usually spend on a website, and people seem to be very engaged. If I don't want to set up an account, it does let me continue to answer questions. However, I can't log back in, and you see these other 2 tabs, My Answers and My Progress. I can't change my answers, and I can't see my progress if I haven't logged in. Logging in gives me an account. Logging in then gives me access to go back and look at who I shared with, how I shared, and other examples which I'm seeing of the answers. So let's look now at the common data elements. Those are essentially a group of, you could call them questions, you could call them fields, that the National Library of Medicine is curating on behalf of the institute at NIH. You can get common data elements from any source. But in our case, what we're doing is we're looking at this set because it is one that some people seem to be coalescing around. And essentially these ask us to measure the same thing the same way across all diseases. And we're certainly very interested and concerned in making sure this is an interoperable system. So in all cases, these fields are using, SNOMED DT, ICD-9 and 10, CDIS standards, et cetera. So any standard that's available is underlying these diseases. Now, for some diseases, not for all, because this is the part where the community really has to get involved. Genetic Alliance has always believed that none of this should be done by a central source when it gets to a disease level. But for some diseases, there are disease-specific data elements. And so the example I gave you of liver cancer, Donna Cryer has been working on some questions to ask people who indicate that they have any kind of liver disease, and they would be invited to answer some questions that were specific to that disease. They could answer random questions from the 22,000 and move into the liver-specific ones, which many of them would want to do. And so this starts to ask detailed disease information that has really been put together by a team of scientists, by advisors to a specific either study or organization. So, for example, I might take my pseudoxanthoma elasticum organization, PXE International, and put my 900 fields of questions on this platform and allow people to answer these in this way. And so we're looking at signs, symptoms, progression, and adverse reactions to drugs. Again, EPOD could be a natural history study, could be phase 4 follow-up study, could be epidemiological study, but this moves into more studies and certainly moves into an area where it's become more of a clinical activity in that lane 3 deep dive way. So the architecture of Registries for All is that we go through this process of education and registration, that individuals contribute self-reported medical information in this fully identified protected data store, that is wrapped with this privacy-assured layer. So one of the questions we often get is, well, all of this is de-identified, right? The answer is wrong. If someone has indicated that they want to be discovered, they want to be contacted, and they want their data used, and they want to do that in a completely identifiable way, then that data is available in an identifiable form, very much like the model of the Personal Genome Project, where those of us in that project have made our data very public. We're tracking on their data. Almost all people seem to say it's okay to see my data de-identified. The other really nice feature here is even if I have just given a green light to de-identified data being shared, being used, the possibility of contacting me and asking me if I want to participate in the study is there. So instead of sort of the wholesale lock, stock, and barrel export a bunch of de-identified data that is no longer connected to and therefore is truly anonymized to a common, this allows a recontact with the individual, dynamic reconsent for other studies, and enrollment in those studies. This does not take the place of those studies, but it makes large numbers of people discoverable for those studies. Researchers can query this database using a tool called RecruitSource that I'm not going to go into today, but essentially it allows authorized data searches. And it gave, for example, one example, the Oracle Health Sciences Network that I think either later today or tomorrow we're going to announce so you guys get a little preview. Genetic Alliance, Reg4ALL, and the Registry and Biobank has become part of that network. That is a network in which several major clinical centers around the U.S. share de-identified information and build validated study protocols with each other. That's going to be part of the system. That's just an example of one of the many partnerships that we'll craft. And then the individual can request information transfer from record holders, and this is entitled under the high-tech law, and in fact is being coded and standardized right now, and essentially then EHRs with authorized document export can come into the system. We expect that to come on maybe Q4 this year in terms of being then allowing information from medical records as well. There's also a feature whereby a study can be done where a clinician can be entering data on behalf of the individual. So we're trying to appeal to the public here and ask for everyone to add their piece to the puzzle. We think that this will make biomedical research move more quickly, that it will be more appealing, that it will be fun, that we'll see that we actually each have something to offer. And we'd like to say onward to the we, that in fact we've always heard the N is they. Researchers have in the past pointed to those of us who are not researchers like myself and said they, we're doing this for them, we're going to help them. We later on heard that N is me with the quantified self movement and certainly all the things with Fitbits and ways to measure me and make me really important. And basically we're saying the N is we and that we need to move toward that we. I love this quote by Buckminster Fuller that says, I really don't change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something that builds a model, that existing model obsolete. The system is looking to sustain itself. And so that is true about every system. And while we are very cognizant that we need to build a new one, we're also cognizant about how do we keep modifying that new model or building even newer models that will move us to the we. And so together, we're looking to build the we. And I want to give many thanks. Enormous amounts of work have gone into this, particularly by Private Access, TraitWise, and the Genetic Alliance team. And that's all I have for a formal presentation. I wanted to leave a decent amount of time for us to have questions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Greg to moderate those questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that great overview, Sharon. So everyone who is on the webinar now, using your little sidebar window there, if you have a question, just jot your question in and then we'll queue those for the Q&A time with Sharon. So Becky, who's on the line, was having some trouble with her volume, and she wondered if this webinar will be available for viewing again at a later date.
Yes, so, and I should have said at the beginning, all of our webinars are recorded and then archived. And in the case where we have problems with technology like this, and I'm really sorry, I mean, I'm sitting in Silicon Valley, so this should not be the case, I will in fact re-record the voiceover part so that it's clear.
Okay. Terry is wondering about the compare with others feature. And he asked, does that mean others in the Reg4ALL database? And how is the data about others updated?
Great question. So what you're doing there, as you were saying, at one point in the preference settings, you actually do say you can compare my data to others. And what you're doing there is you're allowing your data to be compared to others that are in the database. Sorry, I'm not finding the compare my data others. Oh, here it is, yes. So on the screen right now, compare with others feature. And the reason, by the way, this just says not applicable is I did this very early and didn't update it. So your data is being compared to others who have answered the questions in this database. And so right now, and Greg, you probably can answer this better than me, we have a couple thousand people who have answered questions, and so your data is actually being compared to their data. And the data is updated by more and more people either adding or going back and changing their answers. So one of the things that certainly could be a knock against a system like this is in the first 10 people who answer it, and if you say, how many times a day do I need to exercise? And if everybody says once a week, and I say once a week, then wow, I'm average. That's not a good sample size, obviously, and it's also not representative of any kind of mass of people. And this data is only as good as the numbers of people answering it, and this data improves in its ability to compare, obviously, as more and more people get into it. The other really interesting thing is that the system itself that the company TraitWise has put together allows the data to start to draw its own histograms, and that means for us lay people that what happens is the data starts to show associations, and I'm going to use a silly one because I can't remember a serious one right now, but for example, it might say that we have seen an association between the number of times you wake up at night and how grumpy you are during the day. And it'll draw the graph for you and show that most people wake up a lot and not grumpier than people don't. And it will ask you, what do you think about this association? is it right? Is it wrong? You know, do you think this is real, or is this just an artifact? And so we're actually engaging people, crowdsourcing, kind of an understanding of how information can be used, whether or not associations might be right. And again, you know, is this all highly scientific and would you base a study on it? Absolutely not. Not at this level. But it certainly can be very informative about what might come. And I think another good example of this data starting to speak is what right now those of us who run disease organizations are looking to the things that we should be paying attention to in terms of quality of life, in terms of better life with the disease. And I'm going to use an example from PXE. So when we first started PXE International in 1995, in the next year or two, we started to hear a lot of women say, every single time I have a mammogram, I have to have a biopsy. Well, this is really odd. Well, why are you doing that? Well, the radiologist and the physician say, gee, I'm seeing a lot of stuff on your mammogram that looks like calcification that could be indicative of cancer, and I want a biopsy. Well, you know, eventually you hear enough women around the table say this at enough support group meetings, you start to say, wow, we really need to look at, is this necessary? Because this is terrifying, this is anxiety-producing, and this is invasive. We do a study, take 100 mammograms from women with PXE, 100 mammograms from women age-matched, no PXE, do a double-blind controlled study, and lo and behold, mineralization in the breast is part of the disease and has nothing to do with cancer. We can then put out a guidance that says, you know, bring this paper to your physician, tell them that this is typical in the disease. You don't have to have a biopsy every time. That will change quality of life for women with PXE. We are expecting that we will see the same kind of thing, a variety of data in diseases and even in a variety of health states that will start to show associations that we might not have made and that we might have had to wait until we talk to enough people, which is certainly, again, the way medicine has worked, but not the kind of information management that we've seen in other areas. We all know the story from the newspaper, I think USA Today, of how Target was figuring out that young women were pregnant before they told their families or before they told their significant others because of their buying habits. Clearly there are ways to use data, and that, of course, you know, it's not ethical and we can go into all that, but there are ways to aggregate data that start to tell us stories that we're not doing in health and in disease states, and we hope that the data that we're amassing will begin to be able to do that.
Great. Thank you for that question, Terry. Marcel was wondering, he says perhaps he missed it, but he was wondering, do participants enter data just by survey, or are there other ways for participants to put data in the system as well?
So to start with, right now in this beta version, the data will be entered by this survey. And again, lane 1 is just the gamified kind of tease you in with 9, 10 questions. Lane 2 are the common data elements, there are about 100 of those. And lane 3 are disease-specific questions that your disease group or your study in a certain lab, et cetera, might put together to either qualify people for a study or actually do a natural history or epidemiological study. Later on in the year, we're going to also invite the individuals to bring in their electronic medical records if they have one. We know that a lot of the nation doesn't have one yet, but we also know that because of the HITECH Act, as a nation, we are moving toward that. In other countries, because this is international, there are already electronic medical records in a lot of countries, and so we'll certainly be working with the vendors in those countries to bring this in. There are issues around standards. All the medical record vendors do not use the same set of standards, but that is changing as we go through Meaningful Use 1, Meaningful Use 2, and Meaningful Use 3 eventually. The parts of the high-tech activity from the Office of the National Coordinator at HHS that allow us to start to standardize those things. So we will be able to bring in more data as the year goes on. Right now it's done by the survey.
Great. Okay, we have a couple of questions about how this Registries for All initiative compares to other registries in the world. We got two questions from two different folks. David wonders how this compares to other registries in the marketplace. I think he means registry software, such as what Patient Crossroads offers. And then Becky, with a related question, says, you know, there are a number of other patient-oriented registries. Do we know how will Reg4ALL go about cooperating with other existing registries?
Great questions. So Genetic Alliance, because we are in a consortium, in a coalition, always has disease groups work together to create these things as a consortium, as a coalition. So we start from the premise of sharing, of working together, that sort of thing. We have repeatedly reached out to each of the other kinds of registry systems. We, in fact, with the Helmsley Foundation about 3 years ago, did a survey of the whole landscape and talked to all of them. I think the biggest difference is, and so one might ask, why did we go forward with this? We wanted to solve a couple of problems that the disease groups kept bringing to us, and that is, how do we do this as inexpensively as possible so that we're not spending tens of thousands of dollars a year as a disease group, that we're not capturing just one disease? Those were really important things, and that we started to understand that the disease themselves, even are often in syndromes, they're often in continuum of disease, they're often mitigated by other genes and modified by other genes, that it is no longer a good world where these are all silent. So one of the real big differences is that healthy or diagnosed, interested in a specific disease, or generally anybody can participate in this. So it's not limited to people diagnosed with a specific condition and their family. It's really that, I like to say I can go downstairs in the grocery store below our office and I can invite anybody in. The second and probably even more important difference for me is every other situation I'm in, and I'm certainly in a lot of national meetings and international studies, et cetera, they're always bogged down by what's the data access going to fit in the app, who gets this information, who can use it, when can it be shared. It's really nice that we have it, but that we can't go back to the people who are participating, who gave it. The people get no feedback, et cetera. And because of the really amazing privacy setting preference system that this is integrated with, we are able to let individuals take care of all those issues, to decide how they will share, with whom they will share, and how their data will be used. And I don't know another system that does that, including Genetic Alliance's own registry and biobank. In that instance, the disease advocacy organizations are the gatekeepers, very much like a hospital would be, or a single researcher, and they make decisions about how that data will be shared and who will use it. This really puts the control in the hands of every single individual and allows them to make a decision about where that data will be used. It will obviously then break down barriers between systems. You can see on this screen, I have shared this information with other disease groups. I have shared this information with other data analysis platforms. That's going to allow widespread sharing of the same information across systems, and people will be able to opt in and to do that sharing quite easily from a click of a switch.
Great. Okay, thanks for these great questions. We've got a few queued up here. Keep them coming. A few questions in our list about the disease-specific data elements. Kristen wonders who creates them, and Dean is wondering, beyond the common data elements, there will likely be, of course, many more detailed disease-specific fields, and what is the plan? So Kristen's asking how are they created, and Dean is asking what is the plan to make researchers aware that the data is there and let them access the data.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So the disease-specific elements have to be created by the disease experts, we believe. And we, of course, always define that very broadly. We don't believe that just the clinicians who deal with that disease are the experts. We believe that individuals themselves are experts, and that the patient support groups, the disease support groups, are also experts. And so those lanes will be created by those entities. That's going to be obviously more onerous than either the first lane, which is done, the second lane, which is done, the common data elements. The third lane is going to take work from each of the disease communities to create those disease questions. And then we also have mechanisms whereby individuals with those diseases could ask questions. And so in my example with women with PXE and their mammograms, we would have a pathway for women to say, hey, I have a biopsy as everyone else, and we would find out more quickly an answer to a question that we hadn't even thought of asking. So that's to answer the first part of the question. The second part is how to make researchers aware of this data. Well, certainly we're going to use our typical platforms. Genetic Alliance's announcements list goes 10,000 health-related organizations. Those are hospitals, clinics, the CTSAs, the community-based hospitals, the community health centers with whom we have a couple projects rolling. We are going to advertise this far and wide. We're going to advertise it through the support groups themselves to their researchers. We're going to write papers, as we actually already have done. We have a first paper that's out in genetic testing and biomarkers, and a couple other papers in preparation that will appear in journals. Individuals can become aware of this. And then we've only begun. Greg has spoken at a number of meetings. I've spoken at a number of meetings sponsored by NIH, sponsored by the International Rare Disease Research Consortium. Last week I spoke at the Personal Genome Project, as did Greg. I'll be at Medicine 2.0. I'll be at HealthBeat. I have a TEDx. So we are, and I'm sure Greg can name a whole host of places where he's presenting. We plan to present this as much as we can. We've had Forbes coverage, and we've had Business Week coverage. So we assume that that will also get to researchers. You know, we're looking at a real long tail problem in the sense that getting to every researcher on the planet about this is not going to be easy. But we think that there's enough sort of buzz right now that there will be some uptake, and we've seen that, and especially with the various presentations that I'm giving. And I think that it's creating a path for researchers. Well, there's a whole other tool here that I'm not showing, and we'll show later on in this webinar series, probably in a couple months, called Recruit Source. And the researcher comes in through Recruit Source. He or she clicks a bunch of buttons that set up the kind of cohort he would like to see or she would like to see, and sees what's available to him or her in the database. So again, only per the wishes of the individual, he or she, the researcher, will find X number of people with 7 or 8 of these attributes who live in XYZ zip code, and they won't find the ones who have not allowed themselves to be discovered. And then they will go on to contact the ones that have said it's okay to contact them, and or use the data of the ones who said that their data could be used.
Great. Okay, and then Kristen had a follow-up on that same theme about, and I think you touched on it, Sharon, provide disease-specific elements, and what does that cost to do so?
Great question. So we're trying to build a business model for that right now, and we're interested in hearing from the interested parties and what they think might be reasonable. One of the things that we have been looking at is how do we make this whole thing sustainable? Years ago, Genetic Alliance could live on federal funding that was for project-specific things, and now we realize that the climate has changed greatly, and the federal dollars are not going as far as they used to, as we all know, and they're really being consolidated and moved toward more basic funding, funding more basic and translational science in a traditional setting. So we're trying to build a business model that's kind of an iTunes-y model, for lack of a better comparison. So, or an app model. You know, we don't mind paying 99 cents for an app. We don't mind paying, you know, whatever it is for a song, 99 cents. And so that makes it easy for songs to be shared, for apps to be shared. We're trying to figure out how do we create a model that lets researchers use it for those kinds of prices. And then in terms of creating the survey and keeping it served on this platform, we are working with our partner TraitWise and Private Access to find really cost-effective ways to do that and to look at all the different pieces. There's a burden on the disease group to do it because they have to assemble a group of experts that can help them do it. There's a burden on us in the technology sense for both the coding of the questions and making sure the standards are underlying them, that sort of thing. And so I don't have an answer to that question yet. I expect that in the next month or so we will. And I think we do have a couple of webinars that do a real deep dive into the nuts and bolts of this. And we're, in those webinars, going to get into those kinds of issues. And then we will have some non-school to actually walking through what it looks like, what it takes to do it, what it takes to maintain it, and then what the cost will be. But again, we are trying to do this as reasonably as possible without putting ourselves out of business.
Okay, great. Really good questions. These questions really reflect a high level of understanding about what's different with Reg4ALL here. Christine asks about research access, and she says, who manages and how do we manage kind of triaging and sharing the data according to people's preferences, and do potential recipients of data, by which I think she means researchers and analyzers, do they need to register with Reg4ALL, and how do we verify the people who request access? Can you speak a little bit about that, Sharon?
Yes, and that's fabulous. The one that we're still working out. We have assembled a team called the BioTrust Ethics Team. Greg is the liaison representative to that team from the Genetic Lines Council. And then that team's managed by Kelly Edwards from the University of Washington. It has Jane Kay. It has David Winikoff, Kieran O'Doherty, Suzanne Vernon, quite a number of people on it who are looking at these issues and have written about them and have considered them. We're trying to figure out how do we verify who should get access, in the sense that we do not want to limit this to just what the community at large has thought of as bona fide researchers. So, for example, I would never pass as a bona fide researcher. I don't have a PhD. I don't have an MD. I have no academic credentials whatsoever in the field of biomedical research, but I should be able to access the system as a researcher. And we're trying to figure out, there are some real easy bars. There's bars that say any researcher with an IRB-approved protocol can look in this system. Well, that's fine. Now we want to say, well, how do we let researchers, before they have an IRB-approved protocol, because they want to validate a protocol or see if, in fact, there's a cohort available for a protocol, how do we let them look in here? How do we, and I like to say, how do we let smart Girl Scouts look in here? Because the answer, like in other fields, in astronomy, physics, computer science, and Christine actually knows as well, they've come from everybody, people. And so how do we figure out who are citizen scientists, and how do we credential them enough to be able to be in the system and to access this data? I don't think there's much of a problem at all with Discover My Data, because it's de-identified, it's available broadly, it's quite benign in a sense, although we have seen from some papers right de-identified data can actually get you to the person. But we do want to think about how do we protect people being contacted and using data from willy-nilly usage, and instead smart people, young people, old people, people from all walks of life. I mean, I heard the person who does the most folded stuff on folding proteins on folded site is some older woman who comes home from a job that's totally unrelated and folds proteins at night. We want that kind of activity in this data, and we are still trying to figure that out, and so we're open to suggestions on how to credential people.
Wonderful. Okay. One more question regarding how this participant-driven effort interfaces with researcher efforts. Dean asked if there's a parallel effort to align this approach to consent or permission to share with a common approach to IRB or institutional review board or ethics review boards for researcher access to the data. Are there ways that Reg4ALL kind of makes the interface between the participant world and the researcher world either easier or more standardized?
So that's also a very good question, and I think this is a great question to the Buckminster Fuller quote at the end. So I would say yes and no. And the radical insurgent in me says no, because I'm saying we're actually creating a completely different system. If I want to put my medical information on a billboard in Times Square, I can. And this system allows me to do that. It allows me to put whatever I want into a commons or into public access. And it basically says the IRB has nothing to say about that. Now, On the other hand, I live in a world where I know that the system we currently have isn't going to change overnight. And so our work, not necessarily this project, but I think this project will contribute to it, has been to say to the IRBs, why are we hanging everything on informed consent? We have somehow boiled all of biomedical research down to one probably piece of paper. I'd love to say process, but I think in most cases informed consent is not a process. So we have everybody hanging onto a piece of paper and a form. That is way overburdening that piece of paper and that transaction, essentially. And we're saying, actually, this whole thing should hinge on fair information practices, which is actually a whole field in itself, and that allows me to understand what's reasonable about my information, about what I choose and what I don't choose, and about what the system around me allows. And we're basically saying we need to completely rewrite how that's done and eventually hope that IRBs and others that govern ethics, govern research will start to see that in which the individual made a choice, they can't actually buck that choice. They have to go with that choice. The IRB would have to say, I have to go with this choice because the individual made it, versus blanket consents and far-reaching consents. We are, in a very active way, working with Primer. We will have a workshop at Primer's annual meeting, I think it's in November in Boston, in which we will be talking about this model and others, like the portable legal consent that Sage Bionetworks has put together, that start to say the participants themselves have something to say about this, and it's not them. It's about how I understand data and data use, fair information practices. And that will be a lively debate, probably a whole day-long workshop at that meeting, and certainly we'll be advertising that as we go. We're doing that because Primer's really interested in this model and these ideas, and we do want to change the field overall as well as do a project like this.
Yeah, field to present a participant-controlled culture to the research-oriented culture.
Yeah.
Okay, Jessica asked about updating information in the registry for all. So she says, if people update information, is the original entry stored or is it deleted? For example, if someone updates their medication, does the system keep track of past medications that were entered but might no longer be active?
Yes, great question. So the system keeps track of everything, in part because one of the requirements of the HITECH Act is that every electronic system with clinical information have a audit trail. And so we both are keeping track of the information that an individual inputs as events historically over time, as well as who has looked at this data or modified the data. And so on the back end of this, you'll be able to log in and look at the audit trail on your own data and see that you, in fact, made changes in X, Y, or Z, or that researcher so-and-so came in and looked at your data. That will all be tracked and taken care of. In addition to that, one might also ask, what about if a person decided to come in multiple times, with authentication system like your bank, essentially, and actually it is powered by one of the major authenticators like the bank, and essentially that means that you will be asked to give a valid email address, and then you'll come back in and answer a whole series of questions that will identify you. You'll set your little picture that tells you that in fact it is you, and you'll be required to sign in with that each time so that you can't actually put in duplicate numbers of registration. Now, you probably could get around that system if you have multiple email addresses, but for the most part, the answers are unique enough that we'll be able to get around most people setting up any kind of duplication. We'll also be able to track people and their answers over time so that they have their own history.
Great, okay. We've got two more questions in the queue. One is about how this system is part of this movement that's fueling a change in the culture, and particularly this question highlights the value of what the industry is calling patient-reported data or outcomes. And they're asking what part Genetic Alliance and the Registries for All project will play in helping publicize the value of these kinds of data, even if they don't contain something that traditional scientific statistics would say statistically relevant results yet. Are we participating in papers about this, and can those results and papers be accessible to the larger advocacy community?
Sure. So I'm not aware of anyone else writing papers on this, but we've been writing commentaries in genetic testing and biomarkers, and I mentioned that journal because it's Genetic Alliance's official journal, and we get a free page in it every month. So in some instances, we've written there. We were also very interested in our group of ethicists and lawyers, et cetera, that are part of the BioTrust ethics team, are very excited by all that kind of work that can be done with this system. And so we've begun some papers that will take us a while, because we actually do want to start to see the data that shows us that, in fact, this kind of research that has not been considered hardcore, really highly constrained and very top-down, in fact is going to give us an enormous amount of information and be much closer to the quality of life kinds of things that the individuals who are actually suffering from disease need. So if anyone knows of papers that are being written and want us to contribute, we'd be happy to. In addition, we are working on some papers like that. And we never keep any of our information private, so it's at least published on our website, and then we very often try to find platforms to publish it elsewhere. There is also a blog that goes with Registries for All that I think is somewhat we are going to be advertising that more widely, and we have two really terrific Genetic Alliance fellows, Susan and Barbara, who have been writing some of these kinds of things as they see other news that's coming out, because we're not the only ones doing this, that allow individuals to really see how much they themselves can contribute, and it isn't just their blood pressure or their latest dosage of their drug.
And Sharon, is the Registries for All team or the BioTrust ethics team, are they interested in other groups proposing studies they might want to run on these topics about open access to cultural change, in addition to papers that we know of?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are probably two ways to do that. One is for other groups to go ahead and set up those kinds of studies and come in as researchers through the RecruitSource tool and do those studies. And the other is for us to work with groups to decide, what can we glean from what we know already, and what would we need to set up to measure changes like that. What these kinds of questions are asking, which I love, are, how do we get to the tipping point of consumer movement in health that is integrated and not top-down? The expression I like to use is, we don't want to be invited to the table. We want to actually plan the meal and decide who's on the guest list and all the rest with everybody. So how do we get to that point? And we are really eager to look at systems change, and these questions are the kinds of things that lead to that systems change.
Great. Okay. One more question and then a comment from our listeners, and then we'll let you summarize and be done with our hour, Sharon. The question is, Jessica, is appropriate for children? Can a parent or caregiver enter for a minor?
Great question. Yes. So we do have a place where you verify that, in fact, you are the legal caregiver, guardian person who is responsible for someone else, and you can answer for them. We also allow you to answer for other family members that you have an association with and want to have their care records in the system. There are some beautiful tools that are being developed by other friends and partners of ours that are looking at how much, especially women, become caregivers and caseworkers, essentially, for the whole medical home system, and we want to enable that kind of interaction as well.
Great. And then an interesting comment that I'll just share with the group here. Becky says that the compare with others feature is great. We have questions on our list sort of all the time about a variety of symptoms outside of disorder, if they're not another disorder, and she's enthused that this will provide a method for looking at that. So I'd like to thank everyone who participated for the very sophisticated questions, and Sharon, back over to you to wrap up.
Yes, thanks very much. These questions were fabulous. I've been giving this presentation a fair amount, as I said, and because it's so kind of shocking to the traditional medical community, often the questions